When news broke this week that the US government inadvertently leaked war plans to a prominent journalist about a military strike about to happen in Yemen, its highest level officials deployed three strategies to explain to the American public how this major security breach could have happened. Deny?
There was no classified material that was shared. The information was not classified.
Dodge?
I don't remember mention of specific targets. I don't recall specific weapons systems being named. I don't recall specific timing.
I don't recall. In that setting, I don't recall.
And disparage?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again.
Do you trust Jeffrey Goldberg, who is a registered Democrat and an anti-Trump sensationalist reporter?
Somewhere in there is the truth about how the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic was accidentally added to a private group chat which appeared to have included some of the most senior decision-makers in Trump's orbit, from the vice president to the secretaries of defense, state, treasury, along with the heads of national intelligence and the CIA, as well as Trump's own White House deputy chief of staff, all discussing the details of a military operation that was just hours away from happening. Trump himself has acknowledged the leak, saying the person at fault for it has learned his lesson. But finding the complete truth will probably take time, and I'm going to show you why.
Director Radcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
US President Donald Trump ordered, quote, decisive military action against Houthi rebels in Yemen.
As the United States military was planning its attack on Houthi targets in Yemen, one of its highest priorities would have been what's called OPSEC.
OPSEC is operational security, and what that is are the procedures, the rules, the best practices that are put in place to make sure chiefly that foreign adversaries do not tap into what the U.S. is doing, that they don't gain an insight in advance into the secret plans that the U.S. is developing.
And put even more simply than that, OPSEC is how you keep your soldiers from getting killed, how you keep the enemy from predicting your moves, preparing a counterattack, or sabotaging your plan before it even gets off the ground. So let me paint you a scene. The editor-in-chief of The Atlantic says he was sitting in his car in a grocery store parking lot, having just received a text from this group chat that he shouldn't have been added to, but it's a message appearing to be from the US Secretary of Defense that American bombs are about to drop in Yemen. Imagine his surprise when they actually did.
I'm sitting in a Safeway parking lot, and my phone contains now information that really 4 or 5 humans should know.
That's Jeffrey Goldberg giving an interview to The Bulwark, which is a political podcast. If you want to watch his full interview, you can find it on YouTube. But the way he tells the story, explaining the lead up to this incredible moment, on Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Waltz. Signal, as in the encrypted messaging app, and Michael Waltz, as in Trump's national security advisor. Or at least, that's who Goldberg presumes the person is trying to impersonate. Because at this point, he's thinking, this is totally fake. Some scammer trying to get information out of him or force him into an embarrassing situation, but he accepts the request.
There's no harm in saying to Mike Waltz, yeah, sure, I accept your message request, and I'll find out if it's the real Mike Waltz or not.
But then, he says, the story gets really bizarre because 2 days later, Thursday at 4:28 p.m., I received a notice that I was to be included in a Signal chat group. It was called the Houthi PC Small Group. Now, if you're like me and have never heard that term before, here's a former member of the CIA to explain.
During my time at the White House, I oversaw lots of meetings in the Situation Room that would have been called PCs, or Principals Committee meetings. The most sensitive of those were referred to as PC small groups, and they were small groups because of the sensitivity of what they were talking about.
So this Principals Committee, a collection of decision makers at the highest level, they start talking about all kinds of things. But most notably, according to Goldberg's account, it's Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who posts the most sensitive information.
It was a timeline of coming attacks, the weapon systems used in these attacks, some very specific targeting information, who they are trying to kill. Okay, let me just state that. Who they are trying to kill in the next 2 hours.
And this is, according to chat logs provided by Goldberg, what that looked like. A message at 11:44 a.m. Eastern confirming mission launch, including a timeline for which assets would take flight, mention of a key target, and an explicit reference to exactly when the first bombs would drop. And sure enough, about 2 hours later, on schedule, Goldberg starts seeing posts online about explosions being heard across Yemen's capital. He's in shock. The country's Houthi-run health ministry would report more than 50 dead in the strikes. And Goldberg, staring at the text on his phone, is left with an impossible question.
The thought is, if this is real, why the hell do I have this?
Thank you all for your appearance. Thank you for your leadership.
So over the next 2 days, after this big news story breaks, and headlines all over are plastered with word of this major security breach. Because imagine if this information had fallen into the wrong hands, 2 key figures just happened to be scheduled to speak before Congressional intelligence committees. They are Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, who basically oversees every major intelligence outfit in the United States, including the FBI and the CIA, and John Ratcliffe, who is head of the CIA itself. Both were allegedly members of that Signal group chat. And anytime Democrats had the floor,
Obviously reckless, obviously dangerous.
You don't know that the president's national security advisor invited him to join the Signal thread?
I've been around this for a while. This is not information you generally put out.
But everybody in America knows that. Does the CIA director not know that?
Director Ratcliffe, you were a member of the Houthi PC small group signal chain, correct?
it was really just all about this security breach.
I'm going to come back to the topic of the day here, the signal chain as reported by The Atlantic.
And what we learned was that if Democrats hoped to squeeze some kind of admission of wrongdoing from Gabbard and Ratcliffe, or an explanation of how a journalist could be accidentally invited to a discussion of military planning, none was forthcoming. Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't even say whether she was or wasn't TG in the chat.
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not, are you denying, Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Only 24 hours later, at the second of two hearings, would Gabbard even admit to being on the chat at all. But what didn't change was the insistence from both Gabbard and Ratcliffe, and this is a really important assertion on their part, that no classified information had ever been inappropriately shared.
There was no classified material that was shared. The information was not classified.
Now, how can that be true? Shouldn't an explicit minute-by-minute timeline of an attack about to unfold be considered pretty sensitive material?
Targets, the weapons we were going to be using, attack sequences, and timing, and yet you've testified that nothing in that chain was classified. Wouldn't that be classified? What if that had been made public that morning before the attack took place?
Senator, I can attest to the fact that there were no classified or intelligence equities that were included in that chat group at any time.
So you can see, she's not really directly answering the question, right? She just keeps restating this idea that none of what was shared was classified. So something's going on here. And it comes down to a very technical distinction about what that word, classified, even means, and who gets to decide at any given time.
It's a very small subset of senior government officials who can make classification decisions about whether something is or is not classified.
We all know from pick your favorite spy movie, or we can just read it directly from US law, that sensitive material can have 3 designations: top secret, secret, and confidential. These are classification levels based on how sensitive the information is. So if the CIA ever comes up to you and says, "Sorry, sir, this is classified information," what they're really saying is that the information has been classified into one of those 3 levels. But scroll down to the next section and we can see a very small group of people have what's called original classification authority, meaning they get to decide what's classified or not. And they are the president, the vice president, and agency heads, like, say, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth.
So yes, Secretary Hegseth has original classification authority for any information being classified within the Department of Defense. And so he can decide it's classified. He can also decide it's not classified or no longer classified.
But the idea is basically that, listen, if you have classification authority, you can decide what's classified or not. So it can be up to Pete Hegseth, if he so chooses, to put this stuff in a chat and someone said, "Hey, you shouldn't have done that. That's classified." He can say, "No, it's not classified. I'm the guy who gets to decide if it's classified or not."
So bringing things back to the National Intelligence Committee hearing.
This incompetence, this disrespect for our intelligence agencies and the personnel who work for them is entirely unacceptable. It's an embarrassment.
Tulsi Gabbard's denial that there was any classified information shared in the group chat starts to make a lot more sense when you remember that the person who is accused of spilling sensitive information into the group chat of a commercially available app, that's Pete Hegseth, someone with the authority to decide, even in real time, what is classified or unclassified.
With respect to the assertions and the allegations that there was strike packages or targeting information or things that relate to DOD, as I've pointed out, the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for determining whether something's classified or not. And as I've understood from media reports, the Secretary of Defense has said the information was not classified.
Are you aware that the Secretary of Defense declassified this information prior to the discussion?
I'm not.
That admission from the head of the CIA gives us the clearest insight into how members of the group chat may see their role in all of this. Basically, that Hegseth, being the keeper of all things secret on defense matters, he decides what's classified or not. So if he's the one disclosing sensitive details on unsecured devices, who are they to question it? Except now it is everyone's problem.
When you participated in a discussion, in a meeting, in a conference, in a video teleconference, it was your responsibility, just as it was everybody else's responsibility in that room, to know at what level the conversation was going to be discussed, what classification level, and what clearances the people in the room had. So that's, again, another problem with using a commercially available platform. It's much harder to determine on a platform like that.
I was not discussing classified information in this setting.
But as you've indicated previously, perhaps the Secretary of Defense was discussing classified information, and only he can be held accountable in terms of whether it was classified or declassified at the point when he spoke. Is that accurate?
Well, I didn't say it that way. I said the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority, and my understanding is that his comments are that any information that he shared was not classified.
But you have no way to verify that?
I don't.
Except he could have just asked, or he or anyone in that group could have noticed that a journalist was in the chat, or they could have not accidentally invited the journalist in the first place, or they could have avoided having sensitive discussions on Signal altogether.
Everyone here knows that the Russians or the Chinese could have gotten all of that information, and they could have passed it on to the Houthis, who easily could have repositioned weapons and altered their plans to knock down planes or sink ships. I think that it's by the awesome grace of God that we are not mourning dead pilots right now.
When I served in the military, and I served in classified environments. Had this happened to me, I would have walked my resignation in immediately. This is not okay. Communicating these sorts of things in Signal is not okay. Targets, times, those kinds of things are absolutely classified, and we all know it.
Common sense would just dictate that if you were going to be discussing sensitive government operations, you would do it on a government device or on a government system because you have total control over that. You do not have total control over something that's commercially available.
There are two people involved in all of this who Democrats believe have the most to answer for.
I'm of the view that there ought to be resignation, starting with the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense.
The National Security Advisor is Michael Waltz, who fully admits he mistakenly added a journalist to the private group chat.
I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated. You've got somebody else's number on someone else's contact, so of course I didn't see this loser in the group.
The other person, though, who we've yet to substantively hear from is the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, whose account on Signal reportedly leaked all of those sensitive attack details in the first place.
I've heard it was characterized, nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
So we don't know. Will Hegseth's defense be that there was no security breach because he had declassified such sensitive information just hours before an attack? Or might he argue simply that what was disclosed on Signal, even with a journalist present, wasn't actually all that sensitive to begin with?
To suggest that this information that was shared was not technically a war plan seems to me beside the point. These were clearly very sensitive operational details about a military operation that if they fell into the wrong hands, could have undermined the success of the mission and, most importantly, threatened American lives.
I am worried that, this is not an isolated incident. The way they were casually doing it suggests to me that this is some piece of routine business that they have created.
Have there been other instances of this? It's unlikely this was the first time they all decided to get on Signal together. Was there another time?
And this should be an administration that takes security breaches seriously. Donald Trump has long demanded that Hillary Clinton be imprisoned for using a private email server for official business while she was Secretary of State.
Tell you what, for what she's done, they should lock her up. She's disgraceful. It's disgraceful.
So Democrats are calling for a full investigation.
This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error. And by the way, we will get the full transcript of this chain, and your testimony will be measured carefully against its content.
But an investigation is something the FBI has not yet committed to undertake.